Chains, Chapter 30. The British Army paraded up Broadway the next day, cheered by loyalists, all wearing a red ribbon or a flower on their hats in support of the king. I did not see this, of course. I overheard the report that Madame gave the master as they ate supper that eve with their house guests, the two officers who had moved into the bedchambers on the top floor. The highest-ranking men of the British Army had taken over the empty rebel mansions. Lower-grade officers had moved in with loyalist families who had suitable furniture and staff, such as the Locktons. Only we didn't have a staff. Becky had vanished. Her room at the Oliver Street boarding house was abandoned. I was the only servant in the house. It mattered not. My bones were hollow sticks and my brain pan empty. I cooked a chicken and roasted potatoes and carrots. I left the chicken over the fire too long because Madame ordered the silver polished and the table linens ironed in honor of her guests. The bird was so dry it nearly splintered the tongues of the officers. Madame let loose on me in the kitchen after the gentlemen had taken Master Lockton to Ashley's tavern for a night of beer drinking and pipe smoking. It mattered not. When Madame finished scolding me, I set to my evening chores, cleaning out the ashes from the bedchamber fireplaces and carrying them outside, bringing in the firewood and laying the fires in case the night turned cold, and turning down the beds, cleaning up for supper, and sweeping the floor. When I finally lay down to sleep, I set Ruth's doll beside my head. I had stopped kissing it good night. I did not say my prayers. My bones were hollow, and my brain pan was empty. Madame ran me like a donkey all next day, demanded that I stay awake all night to make rolls for breakfast because the bakers in town were rebels, and they had fled. I did as she ordered and ruined 2 perfectly fine batches of dough. I threw them down the privy and baked cornbread deep into the night, for that was the only thing my hands knew how to bake. The cornbread burned to charcoal when I fell asleep, head on the table. It mattered not. 3 mornings after the invasion, a message was delivered to the master as I served coffee. I set the note on a small silver tray and carried it into the drawing room. The officers were in the middle of excusing themselves from the table, buttoning up their coats and putting on their hats. After the master said his goodbyes to them, he opened the note. "A social invitation?" Madame asked, "or business?" "Neither," Lockton said. "It's a desperate plea." He handed the note across to his wife. "Aunt Seymour is in need of our Sal. All of her Dutch girls fled, and she is without servants." Madame snatched the paper from his hand. "Surely she can do for herself. We have company. Why should we go without a servant? We have only 2 men lodging here. Somehow Aunt has managed to take on a dozen Hessian brutes. She requires our assistance." Madame gave a little shudder. Hessians. The hired soldiers from Germany had a fearsome reputation. She crumpled the paper. "I will not perform housework like a common wench. Tell her to hire someone. The times demand sacrifices, Anne. Just for a week or so. Women will soon come to the city looking for work, and you and your aunt will be able to hire a full staff." Madame scowled in her cup. "You favor her over me, Elihu. It's unseemly." Lockton wiped his mouth with his serviette. "The loan of the girl is the least we owe her. I hope you regret your decision to send away the sister. Even small hands would be helpful now." His mention of Ruth so startled me I near dropped my tray. Madame bit back the hot words in her mouth and picked up her serviette and cleaned off her chin. "You will clean the kitchen and prepare dinner, girl. Then you will take yourself over to the house of Lady Seymour and do what she requires of you." Lockton shook his head. "No, Sal, you will leave immediately." I took a clean apron and Ruth's doll with me to Lady Seymour's house. In truth, I did not walk there quickly. In truth, I dawdled something fierce. Folks said that Hessian soldiers were fire-breathing monsters who walked about with swords drawn and blood on their chins. I figured that would be as bad as Madame. I was near correct. They did not breathe fire, though. They spat when they talked. Nor did they walk about waving their swords, though some sported knives in their boots. None had bloods on their chin, except when they ate raw or rare-cooked meat. I found it hard not to stare at the enormous mustaches that sprouted under their noses, especially when the men combed and waxed them and curled the ends. Their speech sounded like they were swallowing rocks, but Lady Seymour understood them. She learned the German from her husband. She said the same way she learned Dutch. There were all manners of secrets locked in that old skull. When I served them supper my first night, a couple of them said "Danke" to me. Lady Seymour explained that "Danke" is German for "thank you." She told me not to be afraid, and that they were just soldiers far away from home. A couple of them were fond of her cat, she pointed out. How could men, like cats, be bad? She tolerated them fair enough, except for the muddy boots on the furniture, and when they spread butter on their bread with their thumbs, that made her gasp and go pink in the face. I practiced saying Donka when I was alone. The work at Seymour House was every bit as tiring as it was or as it had been at Madam's. More so, there were more mouths to feed, and boots to clean, and basins to fill, and linens to wash, and coats to beat dust free of dust. Lady Seymour made sure I ate proper meals 3 times a day and let me sleep in the tiny attic bedchamber on a bed where I laid after my time in the stocks. It was hot up there, but there were no mice or worms on the floor when it rained. The city swelled by the hour with loyalist refugees who wanted to live under the protection of the British cannons. Some of the folks returned from exile were surprised to find strangers had taken over their houses and were sleeping in their beds and wearing their clothes that they left behind. There were many fist fights and a great deal of name calling and threats of duels. The British didn't mix in. With the arguments. They had war on their brain, drilling their soldiers from sunup to sundown. At the Middle Dutch Church, they pulled out the pulpit, the pews, and the floorboards, and let the horses of the light dragons practice. The horses in the house of the Lord made some folks grumble, including Lady Seymour. Up to the tea water pump, I found only unfamiliar faces, slaves who had freed themselves by joining the British. I could not bring myself to speak to them. The old man we called grandfather had vanished. Maybe he had started his own revolution and led Curzon and the other slaves over to the river Jordan to freedom. A fanciful notion. 'Twas useless to ponder such things. Friday stretched long and longer because the Hessians had moved in 5 more of the countrymen. I heard Lady Seymour arguing with a fellow in charge, but he would not listen to her pleas. I spent the afternoon chopping a field's worth of cabbage, while a half pig roasted in the pit dug by the men in the flower garden. The soldiers ate their supper and drank more beer than I thought a body could hold. They lost a few manners they possessed and used the table linens for blowing their noses. It was a relief when they finally left for merrymaking elsewhere. I prepared a tray of supper and served it to Lady Seymour in her bedchamber, the one room where she could find peace. When my chores were done, I climbed to my attic room and kicked off my shoes and laid down on the bed without even removing my skirt or bodice. Ruth's doll lay next to my head, her eyes staring up at the ceiling. I knew I ought to pray for Ruth or for Mama or for anything. I ought to just pray. But the words wouldn't come. I feared the spirit had left me. I slept, and when I woke, the city of New York was consumed with burning hellfire.